Oh my God. This is truly, this is truly the Epstein administration. And Donald Trump does not want us to call it that. This is, shall I repeat, the Epstein administration. But I want to start first with some news from Thursday. RFK Jr. Let's just remind ourselves of what his job title is. He is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Health, right? Health. The person who, under oath, promised that he wasn't going to mess with the vaccine schedules for kids, the recommendations, pretended that he wasn't a complete lunatic fringe anti-vaxxer who believed in the fake studies suggesting that childhood vaccines create all kinds of chronic illnesses or conditions for kids, such as autism. RFK Jr. So let me share with you what the actual F he said last week. I think you may have seen this. He was on a podcast, and I think you have to see it to believe it. So let's put this up here. I think you can see him right here. I'm gonna sit right next to him. Actually, that's not going to make him big enough. So let me get out of the shot. Okay, here you go. This is for your viewing pleasure. It's totally crazy.
Scared of a germ. You know, I used to snort cocaine off of toilet seats.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. opened up about his past cocaine addiction on this past weekend with Theo Vaughn. Kennedy has previously spoken publicly about his struggles with substance use. He has said they started after the assassination of his father, former Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. And he said that past arrests for drug possession led to his decision to pursue sobriety. On the podcast, Kennedy described continuing to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings during the COVID-19 pandemic.
I know this disease will kill me. Right. Like if I don't treat it, which means going to meetings every day, it's just bad for my life. So for me, it was survival.
The remarks come after Kennedy completed his first year as health secretary. Trust in federal health agencies has...
Okay, let's just begin. So glad that he's committed to sobriety. And at the same time, what the actual F? I'm not afraid of germs because he said that he snorted cocaine off a toilet seat. The fact that he is alive, despite the reality that a lot of people who are heroin addicts like he was don't make it, don't have families with enough wealth to get him into rehab. The fact that he is in a position of sobriety is a privilege. And his lack of self-awareness that when he says stuff like, I'm not afraid of germs, other people's bodies succumb to germs, even if somehow you think you have a magical body that can withstand any treatment, any mistreatment. His idea that he got through very rough behavior and dangerous drugs that he took, the fact that he lived through that should not suggest that therefore there's nothing to science and therefore somehow vaccines aren't good for people. In fact, shouldn't it be the opposite? Shouldn't he trust the medical field? Shouldn't he believe in studies? I understand pharmaceutical companies can sometimes not be trustworthy. And that is the reason I think people have lost faith sometimes in those businesses. But at any rate, this man is a lunatic. But it brought to mind for me, and by the way, this broke last week, broke through in the mainstream news last week, even if it happened last weekend. So I just want to make clear why I had this timing here. But let's talk about the Trump administration, which is now called the Epstein administration. And the reason why is there are so many members of his current cabinet, past cabinet, and advisors from this administration, more than a half dozen of them, who have serious ties or had serious ties to Jeff Epstein when he was alive. And so why don't we just begin with RFK Jr.? Okay, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I've already told you that I think he has dangerous beliefs about health, that he lied at his confirmation hearing. He is unapologetic about his illegal drug use. And by this, I mean, and let me just be clear, he's sober. He knows the disease of addiction will kill him. And I think that is good. Yet he never makes comments about how lucky he is that he didn't go to jail for his drug use. And this idea that he talks about it almost in a sort of macho way to defend why people, he's not afraid of germs. He's also apparently not afraid of other people getting the measles and having it spread across various states because he is not a proponent of the measles vaccine, right? So he's unapologetic in a lot of ways about his illegal drug use. He talks about it as a disease, and yet he won't recognize germs as being harmful, won't recognize the fact that having, so-called like thinning the herds and have people die of measles, not thinking about the long-term consequences of measles on people in their systems, not thinking about children and pregnant women, none of it. So self-centered. Okay. Vaccine skeptic, and he puts all of our health at risk. You know this, right? He has decimated the Centers for Disease Control. He's absolutely decimated our protection and against childhood diseases. It is crazy. We know, of course, that, well, let's just leave that part at that. Now, let's tie this back to the Epstein administration. RFK is in the Epstein files, and not someone like Epstein was reading an article about him and emailed the article. No, he was in communication and spent time with Jeffrey Epstein. He traveled on his plane several times. His name and his ex-wife's name were in the black book as contacts. And even more crazy, he went fossil hunting in North Dakota with Jeff Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Fossil hunting. Now, these people, these super wealthy people who have time to create and participate in child sex trafficking networks and all kinds of other illegal and exploitative behavior, just have all this free time to travel and do things like fossil hunting. So that is how close they were. Now let's talk about Howard Lutnick. On this show, we played that interview when Howard Lutnick was on a podcast claiming that he, after he moved in next door in New York City to Jeffrey Epstein, he and his wife went over, were so disgusted by what they saw that he said he never contacted him after that. And lo and behold, and he even said that when he was asked by the journalist on that podcast why people didn't, other people who met Epstein didn't notice that he was creepy and maybe exploiting children, or he was, and involved in child sexual abuse and trafficking of girls and young women. Why didn't they notice that? And Lutnick basically said in that interview, well, because they participated. In that interview, you might remember, Lutnick also said that that Epstein made his money through blackmail. So that happens. That was late summer, early fall when that interview happened, as I recall. And we don't hear anything until these full several million more of the files come out, and we find out that, in fact, Lutnick stayed in contact with Epstein. He even spent time on Jeff's island in the Caribbean, bringing his wife, kids, and several nannies, and that Epstein was interested in one of those nannies. Okay, now we have, and let me just say about him, the way he had like some children and several nannies, I mean, that is also a privilege to have caretakers for your children. These people, remember, Howard Lutnick was also the person who tried to shame people. So if you recall this correctly, there was a time recently during the government shutdown when there was the last government shutdown or around thereabouts, and people, during Doge's cuts to Social Security and cuts to everything, there was a concern that people might not get their Social Security checks on time. It was one of those situations. And Lutnick mouse off on the news saying, well, anyone who's calling in to ask for their check, if it hasn't arrived on time, is a fraudster. And he said, well, his mother, if her check doesn't get there, she will, she'd be fine. She wouldn't make a fuss. His mother, this multimillionaire, is likening everyone to himself. Okay. So again, we had RFK Jr., self-centered, egotistic, dangerous person who is going to kill us all. Not kill us all. That's a metaphor, guys. If you want to take me literally, don't when I say that. He is dangerous. He is harming human health in this country and decimating his agency, not for our benefit. And he was, in addition to that, close with Jeffrey Epstein. Traveled on his plane several times, went fossil hunting with him in Ghislaine. Then we have Howard Lutnick. Lied about his ongoing relationship with Jeff Epstein. He is still Secretary of Commerce, has not stepped down. Neither of these men have stepped down. We have had the head lawyer for Goldman Sachs step down. We have had ambassadors in the UK step down. There are other people who have been pushed out of their positions. Not even a peep from these people. Lutnick tried to defend himself at a hearing when he was asked about this recently, and basically said, when he was under oath about this, he basically said, well, I went there with my children and my wife and my nannies, and they all left with me. And I'm thinking, that is your standard? You already said he was a disgusting creep and you would still bring your family there? Why? Aren't there other places you can travel? Okay. Now, not a cabinet member, but again, part of the Epstein administration. We have our third person, Tom Barrack. He is currently the U.S. ambassador to Turkey and plays some other roles involving Syria. Now, this is super important because Tom Barrack is one of those people who remained very close to Jeff Epstein from before his first stint in prison up until at least November of 2018, as far as I can see, maybe beyond, when Julie Brown's story came out in the Miami Herald. Okay. And in addition to his close ties with Epstein, he's remained close to Donald Trump. What Michael Wolff, the kind of sketchy journalist who was also sort of reporting on Epstein, but also advising him. At any rate, Michael Wolff, in his book, Fire and Fury, that came out in 2018 during Trump's first term, said that Trump, Epstein, and Barrack, so Donald Trump, Jeff Epstein, and Tom Barrack, were, quote unquote, three musketeers in the 1980s and 90s in the New York social scene, clubbing scene, and so on. And after Jeff Epstein got out of prison in 2009, Barrack emailed him saying, thinking about you, hope you are good and life is calm again. They maintained a relationship. Epstein introduced Barrack to people like Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, Russian Ambassador Vitaly Churkin, and Peter Thiel. And all of these people, of course, feature in the Epstein files. And some of them, Barak has been accused of violently raping Virginia Roberts Joffrey. Now, in addition, backing up a little bit, just so you know, Barrack was so close with Trump that he was an advisor on the transition after Trump. He was an advisor, and he helped do fundraising for Trump, and then he was on the inaugural committee on that after that first election in 2016 when Donald Trump was elected, and then he began his first term in 2017. And during that time period, and during the process leading up to, during the primaries in the spring of 2016, Jeff Epstein sends an email to Tom Barrack alerting him to Katie Johnson's first lawsuit, the one she brought in California using her Katie Johnson pseudonym. And that was dismissed for technical reasons. I don't know if it was a lack of jurisdiction or she had stated the claims incorrectly. Later, of course, she hired a lawyer and used the Jane Doe name and brought, it appears to be two separate cases. It's a little bit confusing, but those were out of New York. One appeared to be, I think, in the summer of 2016. And then the other, this was the one in California, I think was in the spring of 2016. And then we saw some, I think, in the fall, like September of 2016. At any rate, when the first one came through in the spring of 2016, Epstein alerts Barak that there is this lawsuit that is accusing both Epstein and Trump of raping this 13-year-old girl. And that happened in the 90s. And that's interesting that he passes this on to him. In addition, when the Miami Herald story broke, and that broke in November of 2018, this is the Julie K. Brown story, when she blows open these questions of why there was such a minimal charge against Jeff Epstein back in 2000 when the case came forward and he goes to prison in 2008. And she blows open a lot of these questions. That story breaks on the 18th of November 2018. 1 week earlier, Jeff Epstein and Tom Barrack leave Teterboro, which is a small airport you can take a private jet from, leave that airport. And, if you live in New York, that's where you go to the Teterboro airport, take two separate private jets, and they both land that same day in Palm Beach. This is 1 week before the story broke. Why are they both flying there? Just could be any good reason, any reason at all, but it's quite likely, that before any big story breaks like this, journalists contact sources. They contact people who are their allegations against them. I wonder whether they decided they needed to get together and meet down there where both Jeff Epstein and Donald Trump have homes. Now, I checked, and Donald Trump was in Europe at that time. I don't think he was down in Palm Beach. And then he was out in California. I don't know if he was even part of any of these discussions. Now, separately, so he stayed in touch with him. And that is the last thing I've seen that people have reported of Barak being in touch with him. Also, one thing to say is Epstein often told Tom Barrack, I call him Barak, Tom Barrack, to use Signal. So sometimes they were using the Signal messaging app, and those would have been destroyed at whatever time frame they wanted them destroyed. And unless Epstein was taking photos of those screens, if both sides were destroying them, they are not here in the record. So we don't know if they actually communicated beyond November of 2018. And we also don't know all the other communications when they said, communicate with me on Signal. So again, now we have three people. We have RFK Jr., who's currently the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who had close ties and spent time with Epstein and Maxwell. And we have Howard Lutnick, who lied about the time he spent with Epstein on his island. And he is Secretary of Commerce. That's two. And we have Tom Barrack, who is an ambassador to the Republic of Turkey, who had very close ties to both men and could have been a go-between. We have no reason to know if he was or not. But I sure as hell would think he would be keeping Donald apprised. And then, of course, we have Pam Bondi, also in the cabinet. She is the Attorney General. Let's remember that she was corrupt as hell before she even became United States Attorney General. She was the Attorney General in Florida from 2000 to 2019. In 2011 to 2019, this is this time period when Jeff Epstein was out of prison and engaged in recidivism, was continuing to exploit and traffic girls and young women and make threats against them and so on. Okay, and no charges did she bring. Now let's keep in mind, and right now, of course, Pam Bondi is orchestrating a cover-up, berating victims, lying, and covering for Donald Trump and the wealthy and well-connected people in those files. She's still producing files that are redacted in ways that violate the law. No names of any of these alleged perpetrators were supposed to be blacked out. Whole sections of 302 reports, interviews are blacked out. In addition, when the Department of Justice got the Epstein files, the FBI, which in theory works for her, had redacted parts already. And so it's not even clear that the Department of Justice has seen everything themselves. So Pam Bondi, of course, is at the hub of this cover-up. But let's face it, before she even got there, in addition to doing nothing about Epstein when she was Attorney General of Florida, when she became Attorney General of Florida in 2011, there had already been over at least 22 complaints to the Florida Attorney General's office about Donald Trump's fake university. And so she walks into this office when that is happening. So in 2013, after she's been in there for, almost 2 years, or at least over 2 years, the New York Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, decides to bring the RICO case, the racketeering case against the Trump University, which I think had changed its name by then because it had to, and contacted Pam Bondi to see if Florida wanted to join in. Okay. And that was in August of 2013. A month later, her office said that Florida was definitely looking into those allegations. 4 days later, when she was asked, she solicited from Donald Trump, personally solicited a $25,000 donation in support of her reelection campaign. She did. And that money was paid out to a political group that supported her shortly after that. This is Pam Bondi. I think you see a pattern here. Every single person who also has links to Jeff Epstein that we have looked at so far may themselves also be involved in shady dealings. Lutnick, I didn't have anything to say to him about anything else he was doing that was shady. I just only had to mention his lies about Epstein. Okay. And then, of course, we've gotten, that was just, and these are people who are here now. So this is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that's one. So the Trump administration is the Epstein administration. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Epstein. Howard Lutnick, Secretary of Commerce, is Epstein. Tom Barrack, U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Turkey, Epstein. Pam Bondi, Attorney General, Epstein. That's four. And let's not forget, we have Elon Musk, who led Doge, and Steve Bannon, who is an ongoing advisor, who had tons of contact in the files with Epstein. That's six. And then, of course, the last administration, there was Alice Acosta, Secretary of Labor, and Julie K. Brown, did have this story that was entitled "How a Future Trump Cabinet Member Gave a Serial Sex Abuser the Deal of a Lifetime." Okay. Those are 7 people right there. Fair enough that Acosta is not part of this administration, but there are 6 people, 5 of whom, well, 6 people that I have just identified who are closely tied to this administration, who are really Epstein administration people. Okay, there is more messed up stuff about this cabinet that I could throw out at you, but I really wanted to today just make those notations. Now, friends, I got a few more things to share with you today from the news. I think you might have read the story or heard about the story in the Wall Street Journal about Kristi Noem and her assistant, Carrie Lewandowski. I say assistant because there are allegations that they have a personal relationship, and how she absolutely threw a fit. She was traveling on this airplane at our expense, this government plane, and she fired the pilot. Well, she was on this plane traveling with Lewandowski, you know, being involved in her overseeing the murder of U.S. citizens and the terrorizing of people who are here and are nonviolent contributors to our society, immigrants who are here either in the process of getting the proper papers or undocumented, including children, presiding over people's murders, deaths, disease, and I think torture in inhumane conditions. But she's flying with her boyfriend, or the person they say is her boyfriend, and the pilot had to change planes for whatever reason. And when they changed to a different plane, her blanket got left behind. And so what she did, if you can believe it, is fire the pilot. But then she realized without that pilot, she couldn't get to where she was going. So she had to rehire him. And perhaps, did she? I don't know if she then fired him later. This is what we have going on in this government. So I'd like to share that with you right now.
What stood out to you?
Well, this is why they're not being funded right now. Nobody wants to pay for this. But what really jumps off the page of the story and your lead in there is that these guys, these ICE agents, they're dragging women by their hair through the streets, chasing people through the fields and the farms where they work. They've shot a nurse named Preddy and a mom named Good. And the only person in the world who has been held accountable by the Department of Homeland Security is the pilot who somehow forgot to move Kristi Noem's blankie. I mean, that's bananas. And you would at least expect that maybe you would have a slap on the wrist or like a thumbs down on their socials, or the ICE officers would not be paid for maybe the day that they publicly executed these 2 individuals. No, there's been no accountability except to punitively go after a pilot. It's sick, and that's why they're not being funded right now.
That is quite certainly the world that we are in right now. So that was Eric Swalwell, congressman from California's take on that Wall Street Journal story. Okay, here's some good news. I think we need to be encouraged. When ICE is moving in to New Jersey and beginning to, with their masks and their brutality and their illegal actions and their immoral behavior, terrorizing the communities. They did something in New Jersey where they're showing up at a bus stop and, you know, freaking out the children and so on. And I want to share with you what gives me hope, which is this guy, you know, a total normie in Camden, coming out to protest for the first time in his life.
And if you could just tell me again why you said that you came out tonight.
So I've never protested before in my entire life, but sorry.
It's all right.
I watched 4th and 5th grade kids run away from our own government. I never want to see that again. And I'm not going to stand by and watch my neighbors run away scared. That's not Camden County. That's not New Jersey. It's not the United States. I love the United States. I love New Jersey. And I love Camden County. I love Lindenwold too. But that's not what, you know, we are. It's not who we are. And I decided, like I said, come out here and stay with you guys and be part of this, because I never want to see a child ever run away from our own government ever again. Sorry about getting emotional.
That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah. That says it all. I never want to see a child run away from our own government. He doesn't want to see his neighbors living in fear. He doesn't. Now, let's also note that not enough people are focusing the blame on Donald Trump and the Republicans. And you get someone like Thom Tillis, the Republican, who seems to point the finger everywhere, claiming, people aren't giving Donald Trump good advice. I think it's because he doesn't feel like he can say Donald Trump is taking the advice he's seeking. Donald Trump is out of control. So I'm going to show you this approach, which is a problem.
My beef almost always relates to what I consider to be how things are being done. And I think the president has some advisors around him. You've heard me talk about Stephen Miller. You know my opinion about Kristi Noem. These are people that don't look around corners and are not taking care of this president's legacy, and I intend to. And if I have to speak bluntly, that's what I'm going to do in my remaining time in the Senate.
This is his legacy, Tom. And this is your legacy, Thom Tillis. You are a coward. Don't try to whitewash this. This is who Donald Trump is. This is a man who tried to use violence to overthrow the lawful election returns in 2020 and keep power. This is who Donald Trump is. He's all over the Epstein files. He's an adjudicated rapist. He is a convicted fraudster, and that those 34 felony counts under which the jury found him guilty were related to cheating in the 2016 election. That is why falsification of business records became felonies, because he was the whole falsification of business records to hide the payoff to Stormy Daniels was interfering in an election under New York law, and that's what made those charges a felony. Let's not cover this up. And speaking of Donald Trump, let's also consider this fact.
Who was involved in the trafficking of girls and women? It wasn't just Ghislaine Maxwell. Why were there so many women being attacked in places across the country, whether it was New York, but also Palm Beach? You look at Mar-a-Lago. Why was Mar-a-Lago a location where women continue to be trafficked from? So these are questions that we need to ask. We have questions for President Trump. And I think the broader issue here is, why wasn't this investigated when these accusations and these stories actually were heard by the FBI years ago? Where was the investigation?
Couple things there for Thom Tillis and everyone else. There is no saving Donald Trump's legacy. This is it. Remember that we knew that several people said that they were sent to Jeffrey Epstein's home even though he wasn't a member of Mar-a-Lago, he was given the privilege of having people sent to his home. And it turns out he was trying to sexually and sometimes sexually assaulted them, giving them massages. We know that Virginia Roberts was recruited away from there. We know that Donald Trump complained that Epstein was stealing his people. We have a lot of questions. So I've got a few more things for you too. Let's talk about the Epstein administration. I'm going to say that over and over again.
Stability. And just very quickly, if you will, you've supported most of what Donald Trump has done during his presidency. But because of your actions with these files, he is supporting your primary opponent and has waged very personal attacks on you. I know we just have a few seconds here, but just your reaction to that.
Look, this is about the Epstein class. The people who are funding the attacks against me, they may or may not be implicated in these files, but they were certainly rubbing shoulders with the people who are in these files. They're billionaires who are friends with these people, and that's what I'm up against in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump told us that even though, he had dinner with these kinds of people in New York City and West Palm Beach, that he would be transparent, but he's not. He's still in with the Epstein class. This is the Epstein administration, and they're attacking me for trying to get these files released.
And
Martha Raddatz, thank you for that interview. I like this. It's not just the Epstein class of people, it's the Epstein administration. Thank you, Tom Massie. He has just a little more courage than Tom Tillis. The trouble, though, of course, with Massie is that, let's just say it. He could easily caucus with the Democrats and help bring down this administration. But again, a bridge too far. At some point, we're going to have to revisit that. Now, speaking of Massie, I'd like to share with you what he has to say about Pam Bondi.
To you about one of the moments in the hearing, and that is the Attorney General would not look at the Epstein survivors behind her. Did that surprise you?
I think that was kind of cold on her part. I think she was afraid to. And look, these survivors would love to have a meeting. It's not about Bill Clinton and it's not about Donald Trump. This Epstein Files Transparency Act was about getting these survivors justice. We've got some degree of transparency, but it's called the Department of Justice, not the Department of Transparency. And so what these survivors need, they need to see some of their own 302 forms, which haven't been released, and they also need to see some of the men that they've implicated prosecuted.
Do you still have confidence in Pam Bondi as Attorney General?
I don't think Pam Bondi has confidence in Pam Bondi. She wasn't confident enough to engage in anything but name calling in a hearing. And so, no, I don't have confidence in her. She hasn't got any sort of accountability there at the DOJ. When I asked her specifically who redacted Leslie Wexner's name from the one document that mattered, she couldn't give me an answer. She wouldn't give me an answer. But ultimately, it's her who is responsible for the document production, according to our law. The Attorney General, it's not Todd Blanche, it's not the people below them. You can assign tasks to people, but you can't assign your responsibility.
Yeah, I think that says it perfectly. I agree. And I cannot emphasize enough. There's something so clearly wrong when they won't speak to the victims. Now, again, I need to share with you some positive news. And this is Rep. Angie Craig about the power of peaceful resistance to ICE.
Hear language like that. Should the American people believe for 1 minute that the celebrated and advertised drawdown of federal agents from Minneapolis, from Minnesota, is an actual thing?
Well, I think what will tell us that, and we need this information, is they have been running several deportation flights out of Minnesota full of individuals, some of them U.S. citizens, many of them here on asylum claims, many of them here who are immigrants legally. That will tell us what's really happening. I think they've tried to change their tactics here, but I'm not convinced that this is an actual drawdown yet. Drawdown means back to the just 100 or so folks in our community, stop racially profiling individuals and go after the worst of the worst, like you said you would. The attacks on Black and brown people in Minnesota have been egregious. And at the end of the day, what they wanted out of Minnesota was for us to riot. I think this will go down in American history as one of the greatest examples of peaceful resistance from an entire community in 20-degree weather, which may be the record for the most worst conditions anyone has ever fought back from. So look, whatever they do from now, we're going to be standing here in Minnesota to make sure that we stand up for our neighbors. And I just couldn't be more proud of a community, a state than I am right now.
I'm sure you mean 20 below, because it was cold in those multiple.
Oh, I did. I'm so yeah, 20 below.
Yeah.
It was 30 below, actually. So there you go.
Oh.
Amazing. It's hard. We've got a long road ahead of us. But we are getting closer and closer to November. These elections matter, and we will win. Now, a little crazy town for us. Okay, I've got 2 scoops of crazy town because I think you and all of us definitely deserve it. Okay, scoop 1. Donald Trump is now talking about military action again from Iran against Iran. And you might remember that he previously claimed that the U.S. had knocked out all of their nuclear weapon development technology and so on, and all their burgeoning nuclear weapons. Let's listen to him now.
That the rated nuclear sites have been totally obliterated. What's left to go after?
Well, you could get whatever the dust is down there. That's really the least.
They literally just said to him, you said, and I just want you to listen again, that you said you've destroyed all their nuclear sites. So what is there to go after? Okay, let's listen.
That the rated nuclear sites have been totally obliterated. What's left to go after?
Well, you could get whatever the dust is down there. That's really the least of the mission. If we do it, that would be the least of the mission. But we, probably grab whatever's left. It has been obliterated, as you know.
We would get the dust down there. Okay. And now, second scoop of crazy town, also known as what the hell?
But we want to keep this area safe, and we can't do that without the leaders, and your ex-governor is not one of them. It'd be a disaster if he got in. And one of the things that I just mentioned and you saw the monster that killed an innocent young Ukrainian girl.
Okay, he is talking to the military at Fort Bragg, and I'm not exactly sure this U.S. members of the U.S. Army, and this is to the troops, and it was supposed to be just speaking to the base, but instead, and I'll show you the rest of this, he goes out there and tells them to vote for Republicans. This is beyond unacceptable, going out there and saying you have to vote for us, but there's also this madness. Let me play this, and then I will promise not to interrupt.
But we want to keep this area safe, and we can't do that without the leaders, and your ex-governor is not one of them. It'd be a disaster if he got in. And one of the things that I just mentioned and you saw the monster that killed an innocent young Ukrainian girl a couple of months ago, slitting her throat from behind. And this was the man, the governor, that allowed this man to get out and to do that. We don't do that. We don't do that. Everybody knew he was trouble. Many, many crimes. One of the worst pasts I've ever seen. And she sat down. She had her throat slit. And that's not going to happen with Michael Watley, that I can tell you. So I just want to tell you it's very important, because our military has to be protected. Our people have to be protected. And they will decimate our military. Every time you come in as a Republican, and a lot of Republicans, they come in, they don't do anything about it. I do beyond what anyone's ever done, not even close.
What the hell? So Ray Cooper, who is the Roy Cooper, who's a former governor of North Carolina, is running for Senate right now in North Carolina. And Donald Trump goes to Fort Bragg in North Carolina to talk to the Army troops and tell them to vote for his opponent. This is beyond crazy town. And, we just have to outsmart out organize, and show up at the polls. The way we win is not by condemning people who either didn't vote before or have voted but sat it out or are feeling negative. If people show up, people showing up at the polls means we win. People who are pissed off about the Epstein administration, who are horrified by what is being done to their neighbors and to children, they are the ones who are going to vote. We cannot continue to live in a country where someone who is convicted of child sexual abuse, Ghislaine Maxwell herself, and facilitating what turned out to be possibly the largest spanning child sex abuse and young female trafficking and abuse and violence network linked into likely blackmail. She is now in a more cushy prison where she can apparently get facials and has a dog and is safe. And children right now are in prisons in squalid conditions with worms in their food. And all they did was have parents who wanted a better life for them. We must absolutely stop this. And one last word about the Epstein files. The reason why all the names must come out is as follows. Somebody knows and has seen everything. Now, I know there's millions, and so you might think everything, but you know what I mean. The key evidence. Somebody knows the allegations against these powerful people. And if they don't come out, then these people are subject to blackmail and manipulation, and they will continue to be put in places of public trust the way Donald Trump has been doing, so they can be controlled and manipulated. Even if the allegations ended up being unfounded, they are still something, if exposed, is something that would maybe destroy people's careers and maybe even subject them to criminal investigation. So that is one thing. And two, do we care about victims? Donald Trump only seems to care about talking about women being killed or raped. It's something he talks about a lot in very graphic terms he's done before to serve his own ends and these disgusting lies to suggest that someone who was governor is responsible for this terrible murder. These are not people who care about victims. These are people who make victims and make us scared and tell lies. We know what it looks like in the US right now, and we know this is Donald Trump. This is the Epstein administration, and this is the Republican Party. Okay, I'm going to see you tomorrow morning, and we have a guest. David Rothkopf will be here with me first thing, and he's going to talk about his amazing piece that he just wrote that I saw, and it really gave me the chills. It was so good, and there was one thing that David mentioned in it that made me think and stop for a moment. And this is, of course, David Rothkopf. He is a political commentator. He's a national security advisor. I'm sure you have seen him on his assorted podcasts. And he writes a Substack called A Dose of Hard Truths. And what really struck me is a comment that right now, the number one thing that Americans have to fear right now is our own government. And when I read that, it really disturbed me. And I want to hear more from David, and I want you to benefit from his wisdom. Okay, guys, I will see you in the morning.
Hello, prison mates. It's the Gen Taub Show, where how come everyone? Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today. There was hope and we are together in this democracy we work for. And again, welcome to the Jen Taub Show. Hello, prison mates. It's the Jen Taub Show. Well, welcome everyone. Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today. There was hope, and we are together in this democracy we work for. And again, welcome to the Jen Taub Show.